Josephine Baker lived a life like no other, a dazzling ascent from the grim streets of St. Louis to the glittering heights of international stardom. Born into poverty, unwanted by her own mother, and married twice before she turned 16, Josephine was a survivor long before she became a star. But she had something no one could take away: an unstoppable spirit and the kind of raw talent that made crowds leap to their feet. She taught herself to dance, moving in a way that could make you laugh one moment and weep the next. Her energy was electric, her smile infectious. When Josephine took the stage in Paris, the city fell in love, and soon she wasn't just a dancer, she was the face of a generation. Her name adorned everything from skin creams to fashion dolls, as Parisians clamored to capture the essence of La Baker. But Josephine's story wasn't just one of glamorous lights and shimmering fame. As the dark clouds of World War II gathered over Europe, she turned her stagecraft into a weapon. Her home became a haven for refugees and Jews escaping Nazi persecution. And when she wasn't hiding the hunted, she was gathering secrets, smuggling intelligence across borders, all under the guise of her exotic stardom. The woman who once danced in feathers and diamonds was now donning a lieutenant's uniform, risking her life in the French resistance. In the years that followed, she became a force for justice, a voice in the fight for civil rights. She marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington, proudly wearing her Free French uniform, her chest glittering with medals. And when asked to take on the mantle of leadership for the civil rights movement after King's assassination, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of love for the 12 children she had adopted from around the world. Her rainbow tribe was her living testament to the power of unity in a divided world, a dream she had given everything to realize. From the slums of St. Louis to the stages of Paris, from spy missions in wartime to the front lines of civil rights, Josephine Baker's life was a symphony of resilience, beauty, and boldness. A woman who defied the odds, who rewrote the rules of race, fame, and womanhood. This is not just the story of a performer. It is the story of a fighter, a mother, and a global icon who left an indelible mark on history. If you like stories like this, please consider subscribing or joining us on Patreon, where we post free content every week. As a small channel focusing on biographies, your support really helps. And now, let's get into the scandalous and triumphant life of Josephine Baker. Frida Josephine McDonald was born on June 3, 1906, in St. Louis, her beginnings clouded with uncertainty. Her mother, Carrie, never confirmed who her father was, sometimes hinting at Eddie Carson, a drummer in the bars of St. Louis. But Carrie had been with many men, and while Carson would later claim Josephine as his, gossip whispered otherwise. His skin was dark, as was Carrie's, but Josephine's creamy complexion suggested her origins lay elsewhere. In childhood, Josephine grew ashamed of the ambiguity surrounding her birth. "There was something humiliating and dishonorable about my birth," she would later admit. As she grew, she invented different fathers to suit her audience, sometimes a Washington lawyer, other times a Spanish dancer, or a Jewish tailor. Her last name, too, shifted like her story. At times, she used her mother's maiden name, McDonald. At others, her stepfather's Martin, or her first husband's Wells. When she finally settled on Baker, it was because she had made it her own, a symbol of self-reinvention. This reinvention was her way of shielding herself from the deeper pain of feeling not only obscure, but unwanted. Though raised by her grandmother and great-aunt, Josephine always knew she was a misfit, a burden, the embodiment of Carrie's shattered dreams. 16 months after her birth, Carrie gave birth to another illegitimate child, this time to Alexander Perkins, whose dark skin mirrored her own. As Josephine grew, she could see how her brother, Richard, was favored. He had black skin, she said. He was the welcome one. By the time Josephine was 4, Carrie married Arthur Martin, a simple man who embraced her children, and soon they would have 2 of their own. On rare good days, Carrie could be lively and even kind, but ghetto life made those moments fleeting. Her frustration would boil over, fueled by the noise of her 4 children, and she would escape into drink or the arms of another man. Mostly, though, her fury landed on Josephine, her eldest, her scapegoat. One Christmas, when Josephine was 9, Carrie's anger turned savage. Drunk and consumed by rage, she beat Josephine bloody, screaming that she hated her and wished she were dead. Her mother worked long hours as a laundress, but the wages were meager, and though Arthur toiled relentlessly, hauling gravel, their best efforts afforded them only a 2-room apartment on Gratiot Street. It was a bleak row of tenement houses, huddled beside the train tracks that funneled into Union Station. In winter, the cold crept through every crack. In summer, the air was thick with stench. The relentless noise of babies crying, couples fighting, and the trains roaring by fused with the ever-present soot that stained the laundry flapping from courtyard lines, giving the street a constant, grimy pallor. The Martins shared an outdoor toilet and drew water from a communal tap. All 4 children huddled together on a thin, worn mattress, tormented by bedbugs and the scurry of rats in the walls. Yet amid this harshness, Josephine led Richard and the neighborhood children on adventures. Saturday nights brought the sounds of banjos, accordions, and pianos spilling onto the sidewalks, filling the air with the raucous, joyful energy of the ghetto. Other nights, she orchestrated daring raids on the coal trucks by the station, gathering the fallen lumps for fuel or selling them for a few precious coins. Over Christmas, Josephine scavenged the trash bins of wealthy neighborhoods, seeking discarded toys she could bring back to her family. Bold beyond her years, she would knock on doors, offering to sweep leaves or run errands for small change. Richard remembered her fondly as a devoted sister. She didn't make much, maybe 50 cents a week, but she'd spend it on us. Despite her efforts, when Josephine was just 7, she was sent away to work as a scullery maid, forced to trade her childhood for survival. When she wasn't in school, she was lighting fires, scrubbing dishes, and emptying chamber pots. Mistakes or fatigue were punished swiftly with beatings. "I would have loved to run away," she later wrote, "but I was too small." After one brutal argument, her employer threw boiling water at her, ending Josephine's time there and sending her back home, scarred but resilient. By 1915, the Martins teetered on the edge of destitution. Josephine had one patched-up dress to her name, often walking barefoot or tottering awkwardly in a pair of old evening shoes Arthur had found for her. She fared no better at school, spending her lessons crossing her eyes or pulling faces to entertain the other children. Her escape from a world that seemed to offer little joy. Segregation was a fact of life. Even at the laundry where Carrie worked, large signs declared, "We wash for white people only." On her way to school, Josephine would endure taunts from the white Catholic children, slurs thrown like stones. But such indignities were as common as the smoke in the air, a bitter normalcy for Josephine and every child of the ghetto. By the time she was 12, Josephine's boldness had morphed into full rebellion. She stayed out late, her whereabouts a mystery, and began flaunting her emerging womanhood around men. Carrie, desperate to control her, imposed curfews and threatened brutal punishments, but the tension between them boiled over. One night, Josephine returned home particularly late, wearing a defiant smile. Carrie's fury erupted and Josephine fled, cursing as she ran. The next day, the neighborhood was abuzz. Josephine had left home and moved in with a man. In later years, Josephine would claim that the man had taken advantage of her, but her brother Richard recalled only that she was dragged back home, furious at losing what had been an easy escape. Her behavior spiraled further out of control, prompting Carrie to threaten reform school, a grim fate Josephine narrowly avoided. Salvation came through Joe Cooper, Carrie's employer and family friend, who suggested that if Josephine couldn't be tamed as a child, she must be dealt with as a woman. And so at just 13 and a half, Josephine was married off to Willie Wells, a steelworker twice her age. Their courtship, introduced and expedited by Joe, was swift, pragmatic. By late 1919, the pair stood before a pastor in Joe Cooper's house and exchanged vows. For Carrie, this marriage meant one less mouth to feed and an end to her troublesome daughter. Missouri law required good cause and unusual conditions for underage girls to marry, but in the black ghetto, such formality mattered little. For a few fleeting weeks, the arrangement worked. Willie rented a furnished room, and Josephine found herself with little to do beyond indulging in treats and new clothes. However, Her naive sense of contentment was shattered when Willie discovered she had not only squandered their funds, but driven them into debt. Unable to maintain the rent, they were forced back into Carrie's cramped apartment, where they shared a single mattress with the rest of the children. Reality once again proved harsher than Josephine's dreams. Soon after Josephine became pregnant, but a few weeks later, she miscarried. The loss marked the end of her marriage, as Willie believed she had done it on purpose and flew into a violent rage. By her own account, Josephine feared for her life as he charged up the stairs, threatening to break her neck. In her defense, she struck him over the head with a beer bottle, sending him away with blood running down his face. That blow was the final rupture in their union. Afterward, Josephine found a full-time job as a waitress, but malicious gossip soon reached Carrie that her daughter was supplementing her $3 weekly wage by entertaining men. This only fueled more heated arguments between mother and daughter. 3 years before her ill-fated marriage, Josephine had already fallen under the spell of the stage. She began sneaking off to the Booker T. Washington Theater, just a short walk from home. Billed as the city's premier black venue, the Booker offered Josephine a glimpse into another world. By saving 10 cents from her odd jobs, she could purchase a ticket and immerse herself in the spectacle. Dancers kicking as high as their ears, singers belting their tunes, acrobats twisting midair, and comic female impersonators draped in feather boas. But it was the dancers who mesmerized her most. With an intensity that baffled her school teachers, Josephine studied every movement on stage, later practicing at home, shimmying her 10-year-old shoulders and tapping her feet like a seasoned chorus girl. After weeks of practice, she took her act to the sidewalk outside the theater, smiling and dancing for passing crowds, earning a few pennies. As Josephine spent more time at the Booker, she came to recognize the top performers. Bessie Smith, whose blues tore straight through to the soul. Mama Dinks, the bow-legged chorus dancer with a goofy grin who stole the show. And in the winter of 1919, Clara Smith, Josephine's favorite. A loud and brash singer with a bright red wig. Clara's signature routine was serenading the ugliest man in the audience with a sultry love song, though off-stage, her preferences leaned toward young women. She noticed Josephine's mix of street toughness and quiet ambition, and took a liking to her. When Clara offered to give Josephine singing lessons, she was overjoyed and didn't mind when it became clear what Clara expected in return. Josephine already understood that sex was often part of the price one paid for opportunities. Clara grew fond of her and persuaded Bob Russell to give her a trial job in the theater. This caused the final rift between Josephine and her mother. Like many Americans, Carrie believed show business was a godless world, little better than prostitution, and flew into a rage, hurling insults at Josephine. Used to such outbursts, Josephine merely shrugged and left. Clara's approval meant more to her now, especially with her first appearance on the Booker stage imminent. Wearing a pink tunic and strapped into a harness, she was to make her debut as a flying Cupid, swinging across the stage in a romantic scene. The moment almost ended in disaster when her wings got caught in the curtain, leaving her dangling awkwardly. Yet instead of being mortified by the crowd's laughter, Josephine instinctively turned toward the jeers and grinned. Her radiant smile transformed the moment, turning the audience's mockery into applause. Russell saw a natural comedian in her, and by the time his troupe left St. Louis, Josephine had secured a permanent spot. Within weeks, she earned a place in the chorus line. When one of the dancers was injured, Josephine showed Russell her basic moves, and he was impressed by her potential. Some of the older dancers had worn bodies, hardened by years on unforgiving stages, and to highlight Josephine's youthful charm, Russell billed her under her childhood nickname, Tumpy. At not yet 14, Josephine had launched her career, but the reality of theater life was far from glamorous. The black troupe faced a grueling schedule, performing 4 shows a day for a mere $10 a week. Out of that, Josephine had to cover her room and board. Often, they struggled to find lodgings that accepted black performers, and in many towns, sleeping in station waiting rooms was a necessity. Theaters were primitive, with few toilets and running water. Sickness was common, and Clara continued to tutor Josephine in singing, encouraging her to improve her reading and writing. Still, the thrill of travel remained fresh. Cities like New Orleans, rich with Cajun smells and the sounds of calypso, and Chicago, with its skyscrapers and speakeasies, were enchanting to Josephine. By the time the tour reached Philadelphia's Standard Theater, she had become accustomed to life on the road and was promoted to the prime spot at the end of the chorus line. Maud Russell, who watched Josephine dance at the Standard, noted her rising star. She was dressed like a ragamuffin, but she killed them all the way to the peanut gallery. Josephine's progress with the Dixie Steppers gave her confidence when she auditioned for the New York cast of Shuffle Along, a sophisticated musical comedy written by top Black entertainers Flournoy Miller, Aubrey Lyles, Eubie Blake, and Noble Sissle. At the audition, Sissle himself told her she was too young to join the cast. Heartbroken, Josephine left in tears, slowly stumbling through the rain without looking back. Not long after, at 15, she agreed to marry Billy Baker, a handsome young man from Philadelphia who had fallen for her during a performance at the Standard Theater. Billy had become a comfort to Josephine, but marriage wasn't initially on her mind. His father, however, disapproved of their casual relationship and insisted they marry. On September 17, 1921, Josephine and Billy stood before Reverend Orlando S. Watt and exchanged vows. Josephine didn't feel it necessary to inform the Reverend of her age or that she already had a husband in another city. She hadn't seen Willie since the beer bottle incident, and to her, he belonged to a past she wanted to forget. In Philadelphia, Josephine found peace with Billy's family. While his mother disapproved of her darker skin and chorus girl background, Pa Baker treated her with affection, even calling her daughter. He showered her with gifts, a silk turban, a sealskin coat, and often took her on trips to Harlem for lunch and matinee shows. A few weeks after their wedding, Warren Baker secured tickets for Shuffle Along, the very show that had refused Josephine due to her age. Watching the performance beside Pa Baker, Josephine's body ached to be on stage. Returning home to Billy and the small-time vaudeville show at the Standard no longer seemed enough. So, when she heard of a second touring cast being assembled for Shuffle Along, she auditioned without consulting Billy or his family. Her focus was on the future, and she secured a role as one of the Happy Honeysuckle Girls, earning $30 a week, an astounding wage for her. In her excitement, she gave little thought to how her departure would affect her 5-month marriage. She saw it simply as the next step in her career. When Josephine arrived for the start of the tour, she was greeted by her friend Maud Russell. While Josephine was happy to see a familiar face, she quickly interrupted Maud when she called out Tumpy, insisting, "My name is not Tumpy anymore. My name is Josephine Baker." Maud, however, noticed that Josephine seemed absent, lost in her dreams. Even as she laughed and chatted with her new friends, her ambitions far outweighed anything temporary, including her relationships. On her opening night with Shuffle Along, Josephine's exuberance nearly got her into trouble. Meant to stay in line with the other dancers, she couldn't help but stand out, flipping into a comic routine of her own by crossing her eyes, kicking her legs high, and flashing her dazzling grin. The crowd and critics loved it. Josephine's rise didn't sit well with the other dancers. Resentful of her promotion, they ostracized her, excluded her from dressing room gossip, and left her to fend for herself. Worse, they picked on her for the color of her skin. Though Shuffle Along was a pioneering production, colorism still reigned. Chorus girls were expected to be pale enough to appeal to white audiences, and Josephine's coffee-colored skin made her a target. God don't love ugly, they would say, turning their backs on her. Despite the success of Shuffle Along, the realities of theater life remained harsh. Chorus girls were often expected to entertain wealthy patrons off stage, and Josephine, eager to hold onto her job, was not immune to such pressures. When the show reached Chicago, Billy came to visit, and they briefly rekindled their relationship, where it seems Josephine may have become pregnant, as she would take a short medical leave when he left. She never saw him again. By the time the show returned to St. Louis, it felt like a triumphant homecoming. Her siblings, Richard and Willie Mae, watched her perform from the cheap seats designated for Black patrons. Although Carrie refused to attend the show, Josephine visited her afterward, proudly displaying her new outfit and giving her mother $75, enough to cover a year's rent on the family's small apartment. As Shuffle Along wound down in 1923, Josephine sought new opportunities. She briefly danced with Buck and Bubbles before landing a solo spot in Sissel and Blake's next production. Dressed in exaggerated caricature costumes, Josephine unleashed her full comic potential, imitating animals, puffing her cheeks, and dancing with wild, uncontainable energy. Everywhere she went, she was loved by audiences and praised by critics. Despite these accolades, Josephine's ambitions soared higher. She studied the performances of others, practiced her singing, and even convinced Sissel and Blake to write her a song. But as her skills sharpened, the show was criticized for trying to blend too much art with African influences, and it eventually folded in 1925. With chocolate dandies behind her, Josephine found herself unemployed for the first time since leaving home. It was Harlem that beckoned next. Harlem, with its vibrant streets and cultural pulse, was a place of opportunity for Black artists. Josephine arrived in the thick of its excitement, landing a role at the Plantation Club in the revue Tan Town Topics. She was soon hailed as the highest-paid chorus girl in vaudeville. In Harlem, Josephine embraced her newfound confidence, parading through the city in ruffled dresses, fake pearls, and extravagant hats. Yet even in this celebrated space, she was reminded of the limits placed on her as a Black dancer. White patrons often expected to take a Black performer home for the night. And once again, Josephine found herself navigating a world where sex was just another price to be paid. That summer, Josephine was offered a completely new stage, Paris. Many Black musicians who had fought in World War I chose to stay in France, where they found a more liberal, welcoming society. Within a few years, their music infused the clubs of Montmartre and echoed through the bars and hotels of the city's elegant neighborhoods. In France, there was a belief that only Black musicians could truly capture the soul of jazz, its modernity and spirit. Caroline Dudley, a woman raised on French novels, impressionist art, and progressive ideals, was living in Paris with her diplomat husband. She had grown up in a household where Black friends were welcome, and her father had taken her to Black vaudeville shows. Now, she dreamed of bringing a troupe of Black dancers and musicians to Paris, convinced they would amaze, flabbergast, and dumbfound French audiences. She initially sought out well-known singers like Florence Mills or Ethel Waters, but their fees exceeded her budget. One evening at the Plantation Club, she saw Josephine perform and knew instantly that this was the star Paris needed. In Josephine's dressing room, Caroline spoke passionately about the importance of bringing Black art to Europe, but Josephine hesitated. It all seemed too grand, too distant. She couldn't imagine leaving her boyfriend Ralph behind for Paris. Undeterred, Caroline returned night after night, painting vivid pictures of the success Josephine would find in France, even offering her a weekly wage of $250, double what she was making, and a chance to sing. Still, Josephine refused. The turning point came one evening when Caroline arrived at the club wearing a magnificent Chinese-style coat embroidered in gold thread. Enchanted by it, Josephine asked if she could have it. Seizing the moment, Caroline gave it to her without hesitation. By September 15th, Josephine was set to board the SS Berengaria for France. As she packed, she threw away all the letters, notes, photographs, and tributes from her American life, determined to leave the past behind and take only the future with her. When Josephine Baker arrived in Paris on the 22nd of September 1925, the city was still crafting its post-war identity. She was to be unveiled as a Harlem jazz sensation, a modern Black flapper, yet also embody the most primal of fantasies, an African goddess. Josephine herself was aglow with anticipation. Even though the city lay under a misty autumn drizzle, she stood on the observation platform, eager to absorb every sight. She marveled at the jaunty taxis honking through the streets, the pavement cafes beneath colorful awnings, and the grand stone boulevards, as majestic as Manhattan's museums. What astonished her most was witnessing white people and people of color conversing easily on the pavements, drinking together in bars. To Josephine, Paris looked like a paradise. However, the troupe's director, Rolf de Marais, was less impressed when he saw their first rehearsal. To him, the performers didn't appear Black enough, with their straightened hair, powdered cheeks, and routines polished to cater to white American audiences. With just over a week until opening night, he sought a bolder, more authentic vision for the show. New costumes were hastily commissioned, blending the absurd with the exotic. Louis XIV hats paired with overalls, straw hats with fur. Scenic backdrops of New York and Mississippi steamboats were set to glow with carnival-bright colors. Desmarais scoured Paris for darker-skinned performers to enhance the cast, drawing inspiration from France's fascination with eroticized images of black women, from Gauguin's tropical fantasies to the postcards of half-naked Algerian women sold in the streets. His vision was clear. We need them topless. Naked breasts had long been central to Parisian shows, especially at the Folies Bergère, and Rolf Desmarais intended to take it further. He planned moments when the chorus would appear topless and proposed a duet for Josephine and Joe Alex called The Dance of the Savage, where Josephine would wear little more than a feathered belt and briefs. Josephine was angry and confused. She had come to Paris for a sophisticated stage, not to perform a savage dance that pushed her back into stereotypes. The producer promised the duet would be artistic, the show's centerpiece, but Josephine had no choice. She was in a foreign city, broke, and unable to speak the language. As rehearsals consumed her, she grew more unsettled. Publicity hailed the revue's novelty, 25 Negroes in their crude state. But rumors suggested the dancers weren't polished enough for Paris. By opening night, nerves were taut, and many seats remained empty when the curtain rose. Josephine, backstage, feared she had come to Paris to fail. Yet by the second act, the theater had filled, and as she took the stage for her number, the crowd's warmth energized her. They cheered her high kicks, laughed at her comic antics, and roared as she exited on all fours, bottom high in the air. The energy surged when Sidney Bechet played Big City Blues. Caroline Dudley swore the clarinet's first notes shook the theater. Josephine was back in familiar territory, but as she waited for the danse sauvage, something different stirred. As she and Joe Alex danced their primal duet, Josephine felt a deep, unknown energy possess her. Each leap seemed to touch the sky, and when I landed, the earth felt like mine alone. Naked on stage, she sensed a strange freedom. The critics were entranced. Andre Levinson called her the embodiment of African eros. Picasso dubbed her the Nefertiti of now, and novelist Paul Moran saw her as pure physicality. The show's success was instant. Its run was extended, and Josephine's first 1,000-franc note stayed tucked under her garter until it wore out. She upgraded to a suite at the Hotel Fournet, decorated her bed with baby dolls, and collected pets. Fame came with lavish gifts, flowers, jewelry, and dresses from Parisian designers. At first, the luxury thrilled her, but soon the clothes piled up untouched on the floor. The greatest joy, however, was walking through Paris without fear or insult. For the first time, she lived in a city without the burden of segregation. As dancer Mildred Hudgens recalled, Paris was like Christmas every day. People were so crazy about you, you forgot you were black. Even so, Josephine stayed close to Montmartre, where music spilled from bars and voices echoed through the streets, much like Harlem or St. Louis. Black American soldiers who had settled there after the war, many of them musicians, created a community. You'd run into real talent any time, Sidney Bechet said. Everyone was excited to be doing something. The revue cast had their favorite haunts, like Le Rat Mort and Le Grand Duc, known as Bricktops after its hostess, Ada Bricktop Smith. A fixture in Montmartre's music scene, Bricktop had gained fame hosting in Harlem before coming to Paris. Her clients included Cole Porter, Hemingway, and the Prince of Wales. She welcomed Josephine as a protégée, giving her advice and briefly becoming her lover. Another key figure was Jocelyn Augustus Bingham, known as Frisco, a pianist and dancer who spoke 9 languages and helped Josephine navigate Parisian etiquette. Frisco guided her as she adjusted to the city's social demands, while Bricktop suggested practical steps, like using a rubber stamp for autographs. Caroline Dudley helped refine Josephine's Parisian style. When Josephine entered designer Paul Poiret's atelier, she felt transformed as luxurious fabric wrapped her like a sea goddess. She even designed her own flapper dress, which Poiret included in his collection. At Helena Rubinstein's, she completed her transformation with creme gypsy foundation, kohl, and dark red lipstick. As Bricktop said, The French loved all that chic. Josephine also began an affair with artist Paul Collin, who had drawn her for the revue's posters. Parisian artists flocked to paint or sculpt her, mesmerized by her mix of raw instinct and polished skill. Despite the public's adoration, Josephine sometimes froze in social situations, retreating to her hotel for solace with her pets. Her image was everywhere: postcards, posters, and gossip. Fame made her both anxious and arrogant. A young fan who took her to dinner complained he'd given her all his money and received nothing in return. "Paris turned my head," Josephine later admitted. After years of craving recognition, she found it hard to resist. Jean Cocteau, a precise barometer of trends, had already seen Josephine perform 6 times. Meanwhile, Caroline Dudley had lined up a winter and spring tour, taking Josephine through Brussels, Berlin, and Moscow. Berlin, however, would be their last stop. Although jazz had a significant following there, and black musicians were not uncommon, the troupe faced a hostile reception when they opened at the Nelson Theater in December. Brown shirts gathered outside, chanting racist insults and distributing pamphlets quoting slogans from Hitler's Mein Kampf, demanding the revue's closure. For Josephine, the city's troubles barely registered. The boarded-up shops, war veterans, and children scavenging through garbage reminded her of scenes from her childhood, irrelevant in the face of her growing success. Her performances earned rave reviews, and admirers lined up to take her to Berlin's finest night spots. Yet the most meaningful praise came from Max Reinhardt, the towering figure of German theater. Reinhardt, who had discovered stars like Marlene Dietrich and Greta Garbo, saw Josephine's potential. He praised her dance for its spontaneity, rhythm, and vivid emotional expression. Offering to mentor her, he promised to teach her to portray emotion like no one before her. Flattered, Josephine agreed to accompany him to one of his parties, only to find herself at a stag event. Expected to entertain, she slipped into the role she knew well, stripping off her clothes and performing a sultry duet with another dancer. To Josephine, this was simply how the world worked. Girls like her entertained men with money and power. Yet one guest, Harry Kessler, saw something more. As Josephine danced, oblivious to the leering crowd, she transformed. To Kessler, she became a figure of unself-conscious grace, like the Shulamite woman in the Bible, who kept her purity even in Solomon's harem. Inspired, Kessler invited Josephine to his home to discuss a ballet based on the Shulamite woman. Expecting another bawdy party, Josephine was mortified to find herself among respectable women. Stripping in front of ladies, she explained, violated her personal code of honor. But when Kessler revealed his artistic intentions, her mood shifted, and she eagerly performed an improvised solo in his drawing room. Kessler was enraptured and urged her to stay in Germany. Despite her apparent agreement, Josephine seemed to overlook her other commitments. Caroline Dudley's revue was supposed to continue for months, and Josephine had already signed a contract with Paul Derval to appear at the Folies Bergère. In her world, contracts and legal documents were often treated with casual disregard. Marriage and divorce papers, after all, had held little meaning for her. Still, Josephine carelessly expressed her enthusiasm for Berlin in interviews. And soon, Derval caught wind of her plans and sent his agent to Berlin to remind Josephine of her agreement. But she had a condition. She would return to Paris only if paid an additional 400 francs per show, bringing her monthly earnings to an eye-watering $5,500, making her, reputedly, the highest-paid performer in Paris. Caroline was devastated. Having built the revue around Josephine, she begged her to reconsider, reminding her of all the revue had done for her. But Josephine, unmoved, had made up her mind, and Caroline had no choice but to let her go. For the new show, Derval envisioned Josephine's primal energy as a stark contrast to the artificial elegance of civilization. While the other dancers, blonde and red-headed, portrayed Louis XIV's mistresses in an opulent Versailles sequence or paraded as modern Parisian flappers indulging in window shopping, Josephine's entrance was unforgettable. She slithered down a tree branch, adorned only with a small tutu of artificial bananas, embodying a wild vitality as a man dressed as a hunter lay sleeping in the background. Her virtuosity in the performance was extraordinary, each dance move punctuated by rhythmic surprises, sudden deep splits, and soaring high kicks. But the brilliance of the act came from Josephine's confident mockery of the jungle imagery. She controlled the narrative, using humor and irony to play with the stereotype, rather than being confined by it. This banana dance became her signature piece for years, symbolizing her unique blend of wit and physical mastery. In 1926, however, Josephine was captivated by the new glamour that the Folies offered. One notable performance featured her emerging from a giant crystal ball suspended from the ceiling. As the ball slowly opened, Josephine danced the Charleston, her nearly nude form reflected in a series of mirrored surfaces, creating a kaleidoscope of angles and curves, a living, breathing cubist artwork. Josephine's fame soared. Her name was illuminated in electric lights above the theater, her image plastered across Paris in large, vibrant photographs. By Christmas, Josephine Baker dolls were on sale, and her face began appearing in advertising campaigns. She was now being held up as a modern beauty icon, a profound reversal of the era's traditional aesthetics. Soon after, Josephine endorsed a popular hair pomade, Baker Fix, with her photograph displayed on billboards. Beauty columns even recommended walnut oil to achieve a radiant glow for pale skin, inspired by her luminous presence. Beauty creams quickly capitalized on Josephine Baker's allure, promising a body like Josephine's, while an upscale shop featured a moving model of her in the window alongside the product. Josephine's rise also fueled France's passion for the Charleston, with sales of shoes, frocks, and jangling accessories soaring. As the face of this new cultural craze, she became a symbol of modern chic. By the age of 21, she had reportedly received over 40,000 love letters and 2,000 marriage proposals. Her income grew, and with it, her lifestyle. She moved into ever more luxurious homes. In public, she ensured her star power was undeniable, often seen in a custom car that matched her skin tone, upholstered in snakeskin. Her extravagant tastes weren't limited to gifts. Josephine spent lavishly on herself. One maid took her cloak, another her gloves, while inside her dressing room, a dresser removed her shoes, and another prepared her for makeup. Despite her glamorous ascent, Josephine faced challenges in mastering French and Parisian high society. Though she tried to teach herself the language by reading fairy tales, her lack of education often left her feeling vulnerable, especially at formal dinners. The more Josephine distanced herself from Montmartre's comfortable ethnic blend, the more aware she became of her race. While Vogue praised Black artists for surpassing even the greats like Beethoven and Nijinsky, others were not as kind. Cartoons cruelly depicted her with a monkey tail swinging beneath her elegant gowns, reinforcing a pervasive racism. In response to such hatred, Josephine chased beauty fads to lighten her skin, rubbing lemon juice on her body and bathing in a mix of goat's milk and bleach. Her love life was equally tumultuous. Marcel, a wealthy playboy, indulged her in luxury, furnishing an apartment on the Champs-Élysées with a Poiret-designed interior and a marble pool. But when Josephine hinted at marriage, his interest cooled. Another lover, writer George Simenon, similarly balked at the idea of commitment, despite claiming that Josephine alone could match his sexual energy. Gossip swirled about her, with rumors of nightly queues of men outside her door and accusations that she frequented bordellos to satisfy her desires. In the face of it all, Josephine remained magnetic. When Hemingway described dancing with her at Montparnasse's Jockey Club, he painted her as a prize. The most sensational woman anybody ever saw, legs of paradise, a smile to end all smiles. She had been dancing with a British officer, but when Hemingway cut in, he boasted, "She slid off him and onto me. Everything under that fur instantly communicated with me." At the age of 20, Josephine began a passionate affair with Pepito Abatino, who urged her to take control of her destiny, hire a vocal coach, and create her own platform. Soon, she opened Chez Josephine, a club where she would dazzle her audience. In true Josephine style, she made grand entrances. She would sweep in at 1 a.m. with an entourage of adoring fans, her maids, a chauffeur, and her little white dog. Dressed in tulle and snakeskin, a diamond at her waist, she was the epitome of glamour. Her dressing room, adorned with press clippings and photographs, reflected her growing legend. Beside her walked a pet goat, as Albert the pig, her other companion, was confined to the kitchen. She charmed the crowd with her humor, singling out men and whispering playful, risque remarks. When she sang, her voice blended raw blues with French romantic ballads, captivating all. Behind the scenes, Pepito's influence was undeniable. He drove her with a relentless ambition, at times harshly, even violently, to keep her focused on her vocal training. The club flourished with patrons like the Aga Khan and the writer Colette, who was rumored to be one of Josephine's lovers. Colette's support solidified Josephine's status as a Parisian darling. Invitations to charity balls and galas followed, marking her ascent from novelty act to sophisticated performer. By 1927, she had transformed. When she returned to the Folies Bergère, her image was no longer that of the exotic jazz dancer from Harlem. Her costumes now featured luxurious marabou feathers and rhinestone-encrusted gowns. Even the iconic banana skirt was elevated with sparkling diamante. In addition to her endorsement of Baker Fix, a hair product, she became the face of Pernod. Together, Josephine and Pepito grew wealthy from their ventures. On June 20th, 1927, they staged a grand press conference announcing that they were married. Josephine dazzled reporters with tales of her noble husband, a grand chateau, and heirloom jewels, none of which existed. She wasn't yet divorced from her previous husband, Billy, but that didn't stop her from flaunting her new ring and title. In America, the press eagerly reported on her noble marriage, with headlines declaring her as Josephine Baker of Harlem with a count for a husband. The black press added its own embellishments, including fictitious quotes from Pepito's father, delighted by his new daughter-in-law. Josephine's fabricated wedding soon became a tale of triumph for black women across America. Her dolls, already sold in Harlem shops, inspired young girls to follow in her footsteps. Singer Bobby Short recalled how, in his hometown of Danville, Illinois, mothers and daughters spoke of her with admiration. My God, she's conquered France, and now she's married a count. However, Parisian reporters quickly uncovered the truth. No wedding, no noble family. Feeling deceived, they lashed out in a wave of harsh criticism. Terrified of being arrested, Josephine tried to backpedal, claiming the marriage story had been a joke gone too far. You know how false news spreads, she insisted, trying to salvage her reputation. Yet in the end, the controversy only boosted her fame. Hollywood had shown interest, but Josephine resisted, wary of the stereotypical roles offered to her. That changed when Maurice de Cobra, a French novelist, wrote The Siren of the Tropics specifically for her. In the film, she played an Antillean woman who, in pursuit of love, follows a French engineer to Paris, only to find him engaged to someone else. The story, though predictable, was presented to Josephine as a race-transcending role, simply about a girl in love. Yet the reality was different. The film was filled with crude racial jokes, one involving Josephine falling into a coal bin, terrifying an elderly woman who thought she saw a devil, then into a flower bin, leading the same woman to believe she'd seen a ghost. At the film's premiere in December 1927, Josephine wept, horrified by how she had been portrayed. By the year's end, Pepito saw the need to reinvent Josephine and escape the failure of her film debut. He announced a tour, and Josephine, in a heartfelt statement, declared she was leaving Paris to be reborn. The Charleston, the bananas, finished. I must become an artist worthy of Paris. The tour was nothing short of monumental. Between 1928 and 1929, Josephine performed in 24 cities across Europe and South America, transforming each local nightclub into Chez Josephine for her appearances. Her entourage traveled with 15 steamer trunks, containing 137 costumes, 196 pairs of shoes, 64 kilos of face powder, and 30,000 publicity shots. The grueling schedule was an intense schooling in stardom. She learned how to captivate an audience, even with subpar stages or hostile crowds, and sharpened her skills in voice projection, dance, and stage presence. Off-stage, she worked diligently with coaches, tutors, and conversation partners, polishing her French, refining her English, and learning how to express herself with sophistication. Yet, as Josephine evolved, Pepito began to lose his place in her world. He remained a necessary figure, her professional advisor, a sounding board for her worries, but his flamboyant style and shallow charm felt increasingly trivial. More compelling men had begun to court her, including Crown Prince Gustav Adolf of Sweden, opera star Fyodor Chaliapin, and Charles-Édouard Jeanneret Gris, better known as Le Corbusier, the Swiss architect. Josephine and Le Corbusier became lovers during the South American leg of the tour. He wasn't her typical type, with his thick glasses and intellectual demeanor, but his vision of architecture as a force for social change captivated her. She posed willingly for his erotic sketches and listened intently to his ideas. During their return voyage from Rio to Bordeaux, Josephine began to dream of using her wealth to build a utopian village where people of all races and classes could live together in harmony. This dream would later inspire her rainbow tribe of adopted children and the rural chateau she would turn into their home. Though she and Le Corbusier would part romantically, he was returning to his fiancée Yvonne, they continued to exchange warm letters about their shared ideals. Josephine, however, claimed Paris was her true love. Upon her return, she confidently declared to the press, "I have grown up. I am a woman now." Her new show at the Casino de Paris was a revelation. While she still danced variations of her iconic Danse Sauvage, she was finally allowed to sing. Henry Varna and Oscar Dufresne, the casino's owners, had initially doubted her vocal abilities, but commissioned songwriter Vincent Scotto to create a romantic ballad for her. The result, J'ai deux amours, Mon pays et Paris, became as iconic as her dance routines. Audiences adored her. Critics marveled at her transformation. She left us as a droll, primitive black woman. She returns as a great artist. Everywhere she went, crowds followed, drawn not only by her talent, but by her latest spectacle, a tame cheetah adorned with a jewel-encrusted collar. Bricktop remarked wryly, "You couldn't get within blocks of her. Everything stopped cold." The Frenchmen and the women, too, would come running. Josephine, belle Josephine, brave Josephine. Josephine's transformation into a celebrated chanteuse during the 1930s resonated deeply with the public, positioning her as a sophisticated artist rather than just a symbol of exoticism. This shift was crucial, as it offered her greater protection against the increasingly racist climate taking root in Paris and beyond. As early as 1927, Josephine began noticing unsettling changes in the city she adored. A new wave of American tourists, more interested in the favorable exchange rate than in French culture, brought with them blatant racism. For the first time, she heard derogatory comments in the streets, and she was even denied entry to a hotel because her presence might offend other American guests. One of the most humiliating experiences came on the night Charles Lindbergh landed in Paris in May 1927. The city was in celebratory chaos. Trams waved American flags, and the crowds packed the streets. At the Folies Bergère, Josephine was the one to announce Lindbergh's safe arrival, a moment of pride for her. But later that evening, at a dinner at l'Abbaye de Theleme, an American man loudly protested sitting near her, shouting, "At home, eh? Woman belongs in the kitchen." Josephine was devastated, writing later that she wished the ground would swallow her whole. Yet, this was only a glimpse of the hostility she would face when she left Paris for her 1928-1929 tour, where racial prejudice would follow her across Europe. In 1928, Josephine left behind the familiar embrace of Paris to venture into the charged atmosphere of Vienna, a city steeped in rising Hitler support. It was a world that greeted her with scorn and disdain. As she stepped on stage, the boos and hateful cries of "Black Devil" echoed through the concert hall. From across the street, church bells rang out, their tolls warning the devout that they were committing a sin by watching her perform. But despite the hostility, Josephine danced. Her defiance was in each graceful movement, her strength unwavering as she faced the ugliness of hatred head-on. By 1934, Josephine's resilience had carried her to new heights. She took the lead in a revival of Jacques Offenbach's La Créole at the Théâtre Marigny on the Champs-Élysées. With a vocal coach guiding her through months of rigorous training, Josephine metamorphosed. As Shirley Bassey, one of her later admirers, once said, Josephine transcended from a petite danseuse sauvage with a decent voice to la grande diva magnifique. Her voice soared, her presence electrified, and she became a beacon of beauty and artistry, the likes of which the world had never seen before. Josephine was no longer just a dancer. She had become an unforgettable voice. Yet even as she dazzled on the Parisian stage, Josephine yearned for a broader platform. In 1936, she returned briefly to New York to star in the prestigious Ziegfeld Follies. But America, her birthplace, remained an unforgiving stage. Harsh criticism marred her return, with reviews that belittled her. A film in which she danced with white men was banned, and Time magazine dismissed her as just a Negro wench. The sting of these insults left her heartbroken. The country she had once known had failed to embrace her, and so, disillusioned, she returned to France, the country that had become her true home. France welcomed her back, and in 1937, she made another life-altering decision. She married Jean Lion, a French Jewish industrialist. Although their marriage was short-lived, it was not without consequence. When the darkness of war loomed over Europe, Josephine's marriage allowed Jean and his family to escape to America, evading the horrors of the death camps. When the winds of war swept through Europe, Josephine's loyalty was steadfast. France, the country that had embraced her, now faced the horrors of invasion, and she knew her place in the battle. Each night after her performances, she would shed the glamour of the stage and head to the Red Cross homeless shelter. There, in the dim light of wartime Paris, she bathed elderly refugees, offered warm food, and eased the suffering of those displaced by conflict. But Josephine's heart ached for more. France had given her refuge, a new identity, and now she was determined to give everything in return. In 1940, an opportunity to fight back presented itself. Jacques Apti, head of the French counter-military intelligence, saw Josephine's potential not just as a performer, but as a weapon. When he proposed the dangerous task of espionage, Josephine didn't hesitate. Her reply was simple yet powerful. "The Parisians gave me their hearts, and I am ready, Captain, to give them my life. You can use me as you wish." She was soon given the rank of lieutenant in the Free French Air Force, and from then on, the world would see Josephine not only as an entertainer, but also as a secret soldier in the fight for freedom. With her charm and her American accent, Josephine infiltrated enemy circles. She mingled at glittering galas and embassy events, performing for German soldiers, Italian diplomats, and Japanese officials, all while collecting vital information. To the casual eye, she was just a cabaret star, a harmless distraction. But beneath her dazzling exterior, she was a spy. She listened carefully, gathering intelligence on troop movements, hidden airfields, and secret plans. The notes she made, scribbled in invisible ink, were hidden in her sheet music, passed discreetly to Abti and the resistance. As Josephine traveled, she became a master of deception. In her glamorous outfits and signature style, she smuggled messages and photos under the very noses of her enemies. Her status as a beloved entertainer allowed her to move freely through occupied Europe, avoiding searches that might have uncovered the secrets she carried. She even publicly voiced support for Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia, a calculated move to lull her adversaries into a false sense of security. They could not have guessed that beneath her charm, Josephine was aiding in their undoing. Her acts of bravery extended beyond information gathering. Josephine used her celebrity and her chateau to shelter refugees, hide resistance fighters, and store weapons for the underground movement. Her courage knew no bounds. Even when German officers visited the chateau to question her, she charmed them, as she always did, disarming their suspicions with her effortless grace. But after several close calls, Josephine knew it was time to leave France. With Abte, now her lover, she escaped to North Africa, taking her beloved animals and using her frail health as a cover for their journey. Following the liberation of Paris after D-Day, Josephine returned to the city she had come to love, this time not in sequins or feathers, but in her military uniform. She walked through the streets of her adopted home, seeing firsthand the suffering that had lingered after years of Nazi occupation. Moved by the poverty she witnessed, she sold her jewelry and personal belongings, using the funds to buy coal, food, and other necessities for the poor and the homeless. Her patriotism had never shone brighter. It wasn't long before France formally recognized Josephine's immense contributions to the resistance. General Charles de Gaulle awarded her the prestigious Croix de Guerre and the Rosette de la Résistance, and bestowed upon her the title of Chevalier de Légion d'honneur, the highest honor for military and civil service. Josephine, the performer, had become a true hero in the eyes of her adopted nation, but her heart yearned for more than fame and medals. Josephine longed for the family she was unable to have. Having suffered several miscarriages, in 1953, she created her own version of family, a global village she called it, by adopting 12 children of different nationalities and religions. These children, her rainbow tribe, were raised at the Château de Milans, where Josephine hoped to show the world that harmony among diverse peoples was not only possible, but essential. However, her frequent tours and performances meant the chateau was often chaotic, and the financial strain of maintaining her dream turned it into a bottomless pit of expenses. As the years passed, Josephine became more involved in the civil rights movement. Returning to America for performances after the war, she was shocked and appalled to find that racism still thrived in the land of her birth. She was denied service at segregated hotels and witnessed the deep inequalities that persisted. In 1951, she staged a public battle to desegregate a Miami nightclub, winning her fight but drawing the ire of racists, including threats from the Ku Klux Klan. Fearless as ever, Josephine publicly declared she was not afraid. It was in this chapter of her life that she found an unlikely ally in actress Grace Kelly. When Josephine was refused service at the Stork Club in Manhattan, Grace Kelly, already a rising star, stormed out in solidarity with Josephine, vowing never to return. Their bond grew from that moment, and the two women became lifelong friends. Josephine's commitment to justice and equality continued to deepen. She became an active member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, emboldened by her experiences in France, where she had tasted true racial equality. Her bold activism, however, was not without controversy. Some within the Black community feared her outspoken nature and provocative image might harm their cause. Yet Josephine remained undeterred, driven by a fierce love for justice. In 1964, standing beside the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington, she proudly wore her Free French uniform, adorned with the Légion d'honneur. In this moment of solidarity, her presence carried not only her own struggles but also the weight of a global fight for freedom. After King's assassination, his widow, Coretta Scott King, approached Josephine to take up her husband's mantle and lead the civil rights movement. It was an honor that deeply moved her, but after reflecting on the implications, she declined, saying her children were too young to lose their mother. Despite her many triumphs, the later years of Josephine's life were marked by financial hardship. By 1968, her beloved Château de Milans, the home of her rainbow tribe, was lost to mounting debts. Desperate to save the chateau, she had even peeled the gold leaf tiles from the bathroom walls to offer as collateral. With the electricity cut off and her funds exhausted, it was only through the public appeal of her friend, Brigitte Bardot, that Josephine was able to stay a little longer. Donations from Zsa Zsa Gabor, Pope Paul VI, and others bought her time, but it was not enough to prevent the inevitable loss of her dream. In her darkest hour, it was her lifelong friend Grace Kelly, now Princess Grace of Monaco, who provided a lifeline. Grace offered Josephine a villa in Roquebrune-Cap-Martin, a refuge where she could find some peace. She also ensured that Josephine continued to perform, paying her to sing at the annual Red Cross Gala. Yet, even as she tried to rebuild her life, tragedy struck once more. Shortly after making her return to the Paris stage, Josephine suffered a brain hemorrhage. In April 1975, Josephine passed away in the city that had embraced her so fully. Her funeral at the Église de la Madeleine drew tens of thousands of mourners. She was given full French military honors, the only American-born woman to ever receive such a tribute. From the ragged streets of St. Louis to the radiant stages of Paris, Josephine Baker's life was a journey of defiance, resilience, and transformation. Born into hardship, she rose from an unwanted child to an icon of grace, and then transcended into a legend whose influence touched every corner of the globe. Her undeniable talent mesmerized the world, but it was her boundless courage that truly astounded. Through the rhythms of the jazz age, she became a symbol of beauty, freedom, and the audacity to shatter expectations. Yet her greatest triumph was her fearless battle for justice. She gave everything, her voice, her stage, her wealth, to prove that unity among races and nations was not just a dream, but a reality she built every day. In November 2021, France paid tribute to her indomitable spirit by celebrating Josephine Baker Day. As her coffin, cradling soil from Monaco, the USA, and Paris, was born through streets draped in red carpet to the echo of her timeless song. Her life played out in a grand spectacle on the Panthéon's towering facade. In his homage, President Macron declared that Josephine did not defend one skin color, but fought for the liberty of all. Her legacy, forever woven into the fabric of France, stands as a monument to her unbreakable spirit and her unwavering belief in a world united by love. As we reflect on her remarkable life, let her own words linger. Surely the day will come when color means nothing more than the skin tone, when religion is seen uniquely as a way to speak one's soul, when birthplaces have the weight of a throw of the dice, all men are born free, and when understanding breeds love and brotherhood. I hope you enjoyed this week's story on the remarkable life of Josephine Baker. Thank you to our patrons, Velocity Girl, Jillian Barker, ZenLife68, Junie Moon, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Karen Craig, Second Soprano, and Harry Thurston. It is only through support that I can keep making these videos that tell the tale of these amazing women's lives. So thank you truly. And thank you to anyone who likes, shares, subscribes, comments, or even just watches the video to the end. Continuing to support what we are doing, there are many other great videos on the channel, and let me know who you would like to see us cover in future. Until next week, please stay safe, and as always, thanks for watching.